Hi, I'm here with Dana Walker to talk about her new paper, Leadership Role Occupancy and Leader Self-Views Across 20 Years, Implications for Leader Development. Hi, Dana. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Awesome. I would love to hear the 1 minute overview of your study.
So this study looked at leader development in the first half of life. We have a ton of theory on lifespan leader development, but not much longitudinal evidence that spans longer than a few months. So this is a rare glimpse into 26 years of leader development from adolescence to middle adulthood. And we looked at two main buckets of things. The first bucket is who ended up in leadership roles in high school at age 29 and at age 38, and in the workplace at those latter ages. And then the second bucket was how participants saw themselves, or what are called leader self views. And we found a lot of consistency in those self views. For example, 12-year-olds who had more self-confidence, who had more self-esteem, were more likely to have confidence in their leadership abilities in high school. They were more likely to see themselves as leaders at age 29 and age 38. There was a little less consistency in who held leadership roles over time, but we did see that those two buckets I mentioned earlier reinforced one another over time. So this suggests that leader development is really not just about having leadership experiences, although they're super important, but also about how people internalize those experiences and how they see themselves as leaders.
Oh, I love that. So if I saw myself as a leader in high school, it's more likely that I see myself as a leader today. So I wonder,
Absolutely.
what's the implications of that for managers and organizations?
Yeah, I think a major practical implication for managers is to invest in early career employees. The early seeds of leadership have been planted, the sprouts are starting to show in early career. So invest in those opportunities for those potential leaders, for those leaders to reflect on the experiences they're having, to talk with mentors about where they might be able to go, about their goals, and just in generally invest in that culture of growth and development so that people who have that feeling of like I'm a leader can build on that and use that to say, okay, I'm going to go out and do it.
Oh, excellent. I love that. So, you point out that a lot of studies don't look at leadership longitudinally, especially over, a couple decades. How were you able to study this?
We used data from an ongoing research project called the Fullerton Longitudinal Study. The study originally included 131-year-olds and their parents who were tracked annually throughout their entire childhood. This was in the 1970s. And then we followed up with them a few times in adulthood at age 29 and age 38. And at the age 38 point is where I got involved. And for our paper, we picked the ages that measured variables related to our research question. And that time span for our paper ended up being 26 years.
Is there anything unique about these participants other than that they are from Fullerton?
Yeah, I mean, they're from Fullerton. I think it's also important to mention that they are overwhelmingly white. The sample is 90% white. So that does limit the generalizability somewhat, given the lack of racial diversity. But one really cool thing about the sample is that we didn't just look at managers, which is what most leadership research does. Our sample included more of what we call everyday leaders, or people who may or may not have a leadership title at work. And we also were not studying people going through a leadership program. So we just tracked people whose parents signed them up for a study as a baby. And this gives us some insight into how leader development might unfold more naturally over time.
Oh, yeah. So it's a lot less biased of a sample than if you picked, 50 people who have chosen to go into a leader development program. That probably says something about them.
Exactly.
Awesome. Okay. What surprised you in these findings?
Two things I found surprising. One, I think it's kind of wild that high school leadership roles did not predict leadership roles at age 29. In some ways, it's kind of hopeful because it supports the narrative that people are not born leaders. And plus, high school is a weird time for a lot of people. So it's nice that what happens there doesn't always translate into the rest of your leadership journey, although it can be a helpful starting point for those leadership self-views we talked about earlier. And then the other surprising thing is that when we tested to see if there were bidirectional effects, meaning like, does how you see yourself as a leader influence whether you become one and vice versa? That was very fluid earlier in life. That those two things influenced one another in both directions. But then by age 38, things started to crystallize, and leader identity informed leadership roles, but not vice versa. And so, yeah, we're tentatively thinking that maybe by middle age, those leader identities start to crystallize. Although in other studies where people are going through a leadership program, those leader identities can grow and change. So, but maybe like in the absence of a like a trigger event, like a leadership training program, that identities start to get a little bit more set in stone around middle age, which makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I wonder for some of those studies where they show changes in leader identity, do those remain 2 weeks later or a month later, or is it just like while you're there, you feel very leader-like?
Exactly. Um, I think that's an open question.
Yeah, okay, we'll have to study that. So I know you pretty well. I know that you are obsessed with leader development. How did you get interested in this topic?
I'm all about anything related to employee growth and development. And I remember a mentor saying one time to me, we're all works in progress. And that really stuck with me. And I was like, yes, that's my research mantra. So when the opportunity arose to get involved with the Fullerton study around the same time I was looking for a dissertation topic, I was all in. This was not my dissertation topic. It was Eric Middleton, the other first author on this paper. But my dissertation was also with this project.
Yeah, okay, and then let me ask about younger Dana. What was your involvement in leadership as a youth?
Yeah, as a youth, I definitely saw myself as a leader in middle school, and I ran for student body president and won. And then I
Woohoo!
think I think in high school I did have a harder time just in general, and probably wouldn't have seen myself as a leader quite as much at that time, despite being a leader of some things, maybe if I think about it. Um, and now I see myself as a leader and take on some leadership roles. So I think in a lot of ways, my personal experience tracks with what we found that like leadership roles in high school doesn't necessarily dictate leadership roles later in life, but that how you see yourself does matter. And I don't know, yeah,
It's just like fascinating that it's pretty consistent, like those early seeds, like you said, are predicting things many, many years, decades later. So I feel like
yeah.
that's
And I did have self-confidence, despite like having a hard time in high school. I had self-confidence and like had a good foundation and a good head on my shoulders and all of that, which like again tracks with what we found that early, self-confidence at age 12 matters.
Yeah, I love it. Well, thank you so much, Jana, for helping strengthen the literature to say leadership is not born, it's made, and for all the great work you do. And thanks for joining
Thank-
me today to talk about your paper.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.